reading through 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st Kings and now 2nd Kings. Story of Israel from the king Saul through to Zedekiah will be the last king. I should give you a spoiler alert. It's not going to turn out well. By the end of 2nd Kings, which will be in October, by the way, the end of 2nd Kings, Babylon will have invaded Judah, Jerusalem, laid Jerusalem under siege, taken everybody other than peasants and exiled them to Babylon and destroyed the temple. Now, this was a huge shock. I mean, these people thought that when they looked up on that hill in Jerusalem, there's this big building there, and that was God's house. God lived there. The God of heaven and earth lived right up there in that house. How could they possibly be defeated? And yet Babylon tore it down. Now, Jeremiah, the prophet, he spoke towards the end of this. In fact, his words spanned the time before Babylon brought siege to the city to when the people were in exile in Babylon. And he brought judgment to the people before Babylon defeated them, had words of judgment about their society, and then he sent them messages from God as they were living in exile and hoping for quick answers. We'll begin in Jeremiah 7 to give you just a little sense of the judgment. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and let me dwell with you in this place. But here you are, trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are safe? Then he spoke to the religious leaders. It is you who've scattered my flock and have driven them away. So I will attend to you for your evil doing, saith the Lord. Then I myself will gather a remnant of my flock out of the lands where I have driven them. And finally, in chapter 29, a letter to the exiles, really from God in Jeremiah's voice. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles, build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, don't decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus saith the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, don't let the prophets and diviners who are among you deceive you. Don't listen to them about their dreams that they dream, for it is a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I didn't send them. For thus saith the Lord, only when Babylon's 70 years are completed will I visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For surely I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord, plans for your welfare, not for your harm, to give you a future with hope. Then when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you. I'll bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. So saith the Lord your God. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm living in a world that doesn't exist. You know, I get up every morning and have tea and read the news a little bit and, walk our dog. And, on the weekends I come here and enjoy you all. I spend some time with my son and daughter-in-law. Life just kind of goes on pretty well. And then I turn on the news and I read about all these interlocking, horrifying crises that just seem to overwhelm us. They also seem to defy any real solution. Crises in the environment, crises with political splitting, crises in our economy, crisis at the border, and you feel buffeted at a certain point by all these crises. In fact, that's kind of the point. You define it as a crisis, and then you get people stirred up, and they have to act now. We don't know what to do. We don't really know what to do. We haven't figured it out, and so sometimes I feel like we want to disengage, and I get that. But the moment calls for Christians to seek God's perspective in a world that is turning itself upside down. We're called to engage it. By that, I do not mean that we're supposed to seek out God's party preference and then support that. Not at all. We're called to see into the deep structures of what's happening, into what some people call a polycrisis, what really negative people call a permacrisis, but which a guy named Jonathan Rowson calls a metacrisis. Meta because there's something going on in the midst of all this up and down, something inside and all around it that we need to take a hard look at, things that are inherent to modern society that are driving us towards the brink. What Jonathan suggests is that we are materially and spiritually exhausted, by which he doesn't mean tired. He means tapped out, kind of nothing left, moving in that direction. That's how he sees it. And you can see that in the forever looming economic crisis. You know, we've got news shows that are just about the economy every day, months and months, years and years. That's been the case. The ever-looming economic crisis, we have blips. You know, in 2008, we had a blip. Things fell apart because of subprime mortgages. COVID was certainly a blip. We had to figure out how to manage the economy during that period of time. We seem to have had what's called a soft landing out of that one. But each time this happens, you know, we make little adjustments, we try and make it work, but we're never really fixing the underlying problem. The entire thing is built on debt. You know, that's how cash gets into the economy for the most part, oversimplifying a little here. But the way cash gets in here is banks loan it to people. They make it up out of thin air. They have to do so given the regulations of the government that oversees them. But that's how it happens. And so the cash gets into the economy, and it's there based on the theory that the business that borrowed it, or the nation that borrowed it, will grow. Will grow and develop. We'll have a bigger gross national product. We'll continue to move into the future with growth forever and ever. It's where that cash comes from. But really, once we've balanced all the levers and tried to figure out how to make that growth just be kind of steady and slow, we haven't solved the underlying problem, which is that we can't grow forever. To say it's materially exhausted is to suggest that modernism is moving to a place where there's a ceiling on the growth. Some people are going to disagree with that, and that's fine, but I still wonder whether we can grow indefinitely, especially when there are other drivers in modernism that move things more quickly towards a brink. Daniel Schmachtenberger, I've been reading a lot this week. Daniel talks about rivalrous dynamics, which is to say we seem to operate in a world where individuals or companies or particular sectors of the economy will do things that are good for them, but not necessarily good for all of us. It's the situation where that rivalrous, and it seems to be unregulated sometimes, fast fashions, and overproduction of cheap fabrics that end up in landfills or microplastics in the oceans. Uses up too much resources, not good for everybody, but maybe good for that industry. Then there's Google. I love Google. Do you remember what Google's original motto was? Don't be evil. They gave that up, by the way, in 2018. Just took it out entirely from their thing. So don't be evil. And yet by 2018, they were doing everything they could to use the data they had to control what you and I did. And they were buying up companies and reducing innovation in the marketplace. Rivalrous dynamics. I mean, they'd say, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. It also is driven in modern society with technological growth that's exponential. It just gets out of control. And we jump on every change. That's what happened with social media. We dove into social media without really thinking, what is this going to do to our society? How is it? And, well, we have to do it because somebody else might do it. Same with AI. We have to do it because the Chinese might do it. So we're going headlong into a future, not really knowing what the impact of AI is going to be on our lives at all. Rivalrous dynamics, they push us in that direction. And all of this drives us, Daniel would say, to consuming our ecological substrate, consuming all the resources the earth has to give. Can't replace them. Just taken, eating them up, and because we're doing that, we have increased fires and floods and storms. Get used to the word unprecedented because it's going to continue to be unprecedented. And as resources become limited in the world around us, well, then there will be wars to grab hold of them. Maybe that's partly what's going on in the world right now. Wars, storms, fires, floods, all because we must grow, because we consume. We can't find a political answer, of course, because rivalrous dynamics drives us to a place where politics have now completely separated us one from another. We're materially exhausted. How exhausted? There are techno-optimists out there. And I understand that. The idea that, well, our energy problem could be taken care of with nuclear fusion energy. Or for now, even just nuclear fission energy. Relatively clean, we have to get rid of the waste, but we can figure out how to do that. I mean, there are ways in which we might be able to extend this modernist push towards growth. But it can't last forever. There's something going on inside that just doesn't work. We can imagine answers to some of these things. We can imagine a post-growth economy where there's a universal basic income. We can imagine a world governance that reduces the emphasis on nation states. We can imagine these things, but what are the odds, really? Even if we were capable of putting it in place, who has the legitimate authority to do so? We can't accept one another's little proposals, much less big proposals about world governance. And then why would we do it? We've lost our way. Why would we do it? Because we care about the future instead of what's good for me now? Rivalrous dynamics pushes us to do what's good for me now, but never worry about the whole and the later. Spiritual exhaustion is what that is. The lack of ability to see things as they really are. That this is God's creation. That we're part of something that's a whole. We're all interconnected. We refuse to see it spiritually tapped out and exhausted. It's happened before. This happens to societies from time to time. Happened in Jeremiah's time in Judah. Jeremiah could see that people had lost track of the fact that creation was God's. He could see that people were turning towards themselves and what was good for them and not good for the whole. That's why he pokes at them about the orphan and the widow and the alien within your gates who aren't being cared for, aren't being held because they're part of the whole. It's an orientation that would need to shift, suggests Jeremiah, that we are all connected. So you see this turn of the modernist society from the sense of God to the sense of me and what's good to me, this emptying of the churches, this denigration of religion, isn't some little quirky, funny thing about modernism. It's a rot in the foundation of it. Because all the work we do moves in one direction, and the direction is me. It says in the bulletin that this is a sermon about hope. What's the deal, Sam? This is the thing. You got to take a good hard look at what's real, or the hope is just empty. Hope is what we need, that's for real sure, and that's partly taking a good, hard look at what's happening and then catching a vision for the way God might want us to proceed. We need to invite people into some other way of looking at the world, not the way we've been looking at it, with this drive to grow and rivalrous dynamics. It's a scholar named Ivo Mensch who talks about different horizons of thinking. So a first horizon of thinking is just the practical problems that are in front of you. Can I balance my checking account? Do I have enough gas in the car? So on and so forth. And when those things kind of get difficult, well then a second horizon thinking starts to happen. You start to think of ways that, creative ways maybe, that you can help yourself solve these basic little problems that you have. So, when the economy is shaky, when inflation is too high, we increase interest rates, okay? But as we do so, we're just calming it down. It's second horizon thinking, because it's going to leave us in the same position that we've always been waiting for kind of the next time. Third horizon thinking would be asking yourself, what's the new paradigm? What's the thing we need to really fix that underlies this? Because then your second horizon thinking can start to build up on that. That's the idea. We need to flip the orientation so that human society is reaching for that new paradigm, for third horizon thinking as it approaches things, instead of looking at the self. Jeremiah has a suggestion. For surely I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for your harm, to give you a future with hope. When you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, and I'll restore your fortunes. That third horizon is a recognition that the reality of God's creation needs to become central in the way we look at things in this world. Now that's hard to take, I know. Because after all, when Jeremiah wrote, he was writing at a time when theology or religion among the Jewish people was going completely haywire. And can you imagine thinking God lived in that place on that hill and then it being destroyed? All of a sudden you have to start rethinking everything that you thought about how God acts and works in your life. Jeremiah is inviting the people to do it. It's what I try to do from the pulpit. I know sometimes people get a little frustrated with my insistence upon pushing back what I would call mythic Christianity. You know, the myths that we have, whether they're real or whether they aren't. And I'm honestly sorry, because I don't want to make people uncomfortable. But I do want to serve the world outside. The entire society that needs to flip and recognize that this is God's world. That God is drawing all things together in perfect harmony, and that means you and I are a part of something, not acting only on our own. And Jeremiah wrote, to a remnant. We read the Bible because God's work with God's people repeats in patterns. As things unfold, we can recognize the movement of God in our world because we see how God moved in another. He's writing to a remnant. He's writing to you. You and I are the remnant. The people that at some level are holding on to that idea that this is in fact God's creation, that God is calling us towards a greater whole and a greater good. And as a result, I hate to tell you this, but it's our responsibility to engage the culture and help it flip. That's what we're called to do at this time. And I know we're small. Margaret Mead did say that never doubt that a small group of people can't change the world because it's the only thing that ever has. And besides, we're not alone. We really aren't. And I'm not even just talking about alone in the church. I mean, there are people trying to look at God's world in new and fresh ways outside of here. Just this week, I read Jonathan Rowson and Zach Stein and Ian McGilchrist and Daniel Schmachtenberger, my favorite name, Benita Roy. That was just this week. There are dozens of them. Looking to understand how our hearts can change and be drawn closer to the reality of the Spirit of God. The thing is, it takes effort. It takes effort not to just sit back into what we always did and believed, and to instead engage things in fresh and new ways. It's hard to do, I recognize that. It takes time to study scriptures and spend enough time in whatever spiritual practice you might have so that you can finally say at some point, I know God. It takes work. But today we can begin Advent. And Advent is when we've planted a seed and we watch it gestate. We let it grow in our hearts. And it's birthed on a Christmas day. It's how it grows, it's how God's word develops within us. And in early 2025, when that little child in the church here is beginning to grow, we're going to work through the Gospel of Matthew, because Matthew is all about being disciples, following Jesus as Jesus sought to take his culture and flip it. So we'll be doing that. We'll be working on that. Now understand what I said here. You're the remnant. Right here. And as Christ reigns in your heart, you are the hope of the world that you seek. Whatever burden weighs you down, Whatever flaw, whatever trauma you've experienced or dream that's been left unfulfilled in your life, know this. You are an expression of the creative love and power of God. You cannot be separated from God's love. God seeks your perfection and not your destruction.